Hello and welcome to No Wrong Choices, a podcast about the adventures of life that explores the career journeys of successful and interesting people. I'm Larry Samuels, soon to be joined by the other fellows Tushar Saxena and Larry Shea. If you've been enjoying our show, please be sure to follow us on your favorite podcasting platform and to give us a 5-star rating. Also, to learn more about us, please visit our website at NoWrongChoices.com or follow us on social media by searching for No Wrong Choices on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. This episode features someone we've been referring to as the world's most interesting man, the filmmaker, writer, producer, director, musician, guitar tech, and sculptor Harry Greenberger. Larry Shea, why don't you lead us into this one?
I'm sure you left off at least 20 hats that this guy could be wearing because he has so many jobs. It's tough to keep track. We loved this conversation. We can't wait to share it with everybody here on No Wrong Choices. He's just a man of incredible diversity of artistic outlet, and that's something I think I truly admire about him. I watched his films. I've prepared for this interview, and I'm just fascinated with the character that he is and how many hats he wears, and doesn't just put them on. He wears them with style. He wears them well, so it was exciting to talk to Harry, and we really can't wait to share this with you.
I gotta tell you, the one thing we weren't able to do was talk comic books with him. And this still was a really long interview. And I don't mean like super long. But
I think you did talk comic books. We just had to edit it out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, imagine what's on the cutting room floor of this interview, and I still didn't get to talk comic books with him. You said it right, Shay, is that what he is not really, he's not a movie director. He's not a musician. He's not a sculptor. What he is, he's an artist, and he makes art. That's what he does. And whatever the medium is, whether it be paint, whether it be film, whether it be music, the guy is just a creative person. And I got to tell you, it's rare that we get to speak to someone of like that kind of ilk and really that kind of a creative force. And that's what Harry Greenberger is. He's a creative force. And I got to tell you, we had such a great time with Harry just to kind of pick his brain a little bit and to hear his journey. And I got to tell you, I came away so juiced and jazzed after this interview. I want to make movies like Harry Greenberger. I'm telling you this. This is what I want to do. No, we had a great time, and I wish we could have spent another 3 hours talking to him.
Yeah, and picking up on that, the thing that's going to come out is all about being genuine, being real, building an amazing network, and how opportunities in a lot of ways can find you and will find you if you are, that type of person. His music background is very interesting. He's, I think, as he put it, an average player, but that got him all kinds of opportunities along the way. So just a fascinating guy. He's going to talk about his relationships with Bruce Springsteen, Ryan Adams, Phil Lesh, and his very good friend, Jesse Malin. It's important for me to point out that this was recorded prior to Jesse publicly sharing that he's been dealing with some complex health issues. We wish Jesse all the best. Here is Harry Greenberger. Now joining No Wrong Choices is the award-winning filmmaker, director, writer, musician, and even guitar tech, Harry Greenberger. Harry, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay, so Harry, you do all of these things. I want to know exactly, what is your job title?
Yeah, how do you describe yourself?
I usually fail to do so. I usually just say it's complicated. I go with that a lot of the time, but I depends on who's asking. Like if it's somebody in film, I'll say I'm a writer and director and sometimes producer. And if it's somebody in music, I'll say I'm a guitar tech or a musician. It's, I sort of just try to aim it at whatever audience is asking.
So wearing that many hats, I need to know, when did you decide to put those hats on? Let's take you all the way back to the beginning. Let's talk about your dream. When you were growing up, what was the big dream? What was the one thing that you said, I need to do this with my life because I need to let this creative outlet flow? What was the dream?
Well, I think I always wanted to do something artistic. I started out, I think probably the first inclination was towards drawing. And then I saw Star Wars, and like so many kids of my generation, I was exactly the right age for that. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I immediately started thinking, well, who did that and how does somebody do that and what is that job called? And my parents luckily understood enough to say that some guy named George Lucas did that, and I started trying to figure out how to make films. And as I've gone along in the industry, I meet a lot of people who have that same story. It feels unique when it happens to you in your small town, but then you find out that was fairly universal. There's people all across all across every continent that have that same story.
So as you're growing up and you're going through school, obviously, like the movie The Fabelmans, for example, like where you have Spielberg who's out there as a child making movies. I'm assuming that you made movies as a kid then too. Like at some point you picked up probably an 8mm camera somewhere and was able to start making movies.
I did, except believe it or not, I actually started with a VHS camcorder.
Okay.
The exact one that Marty McFly is using in the movie Back to the Future, that sort of red and black JVC camcorder. It came along just when I was the right age for it, and my dad was sort of an early adopter of technology, and he had sort of, before that, he had like a whole large video camera with a sort of shoulder slung pack that would feed a sort of a VCR he would carry around and feed the signal into. So he was more advanced than I was, and he knew that I wanted to be a filmmaker, and he bought me, along with my mom, a little JVC camcorder, and I started making little films on a format that doesn't really exist anymore called VHS-C, which were little mini VHS tapes that you had to pop into a VHS size adapter.
I don't remember those.
Yeah, I have probably 200 or 300 of those filled with little films and home movies and stuff that I made. But then in high school, I had a big high school. They had a filmmaking class, which was unusual for those days, and that's where I got an 8mm camera in my hands. And that was the challenge that they threw at you was you only get one roll of film, make a film with one little full roll. So you kind of had to do your editing in camera, and I saw that as my chance to prove to my parents and my friends that I deserved to follow this dream. And so I made the best film I could, and as I always say, I won all the awards in that little high school film class where I was probably the only student that actually gave a shit. And so but I was very determined, and I wasn't going to leave it to chance. So I made the best little nonsense film that I possibly could, and I was hoping that would get me to Hollywood, and it didn't.
Well, with that, I was going to ask, whether it was the VHS camcorder, whether it was the 8mm, what is that first project you remember being proud of that was a thing?
Well, all the little films I made with the VHS-C camera were kind of just learning the grammar of filmmaking and the vocabulary of filmmaking and the techniques of filmmaking. But I did it, almost all of those were with my friend Glenn, and we just made very silly films, and there was no attempt to do anything beyond sometimes derivative jokes, sometimes vaguely original jokes. And but then with that film and filmmaking class, the challenge was you had to make a music video because we couldn't do any sync sound. And so you had to just play something that you could sync to. At that point, a cassette, because there weren't CDs yet. I'm old and
grown up.
We're all old.
Not old. Grown
we
up.
We know from cassettes.
Yeah. And so you had to make a film where you had a little sync point at the beginning that would be when you would start the cassette in class and play that otherwise silent film over a song. And I chose Baba O'Reilly by The Who.
Very nice.
And made a film in my
Great
high
song.
school using, and it fit well. Like, it sort of fits into that perfect
Teenage
teen
Wasteland
angst theme, and that is so readily, it's so readily available to you as a teenager in school. And I managed to sweet talk the principal into appearing in it and being the villain. And,
That's great.
And it was just, like a lot of it, flag waving imagery, sort of cross cut with other students in the school, and then a few students running towards a chain link fence and breaking out of the school. Kind of, simple and derivative, but it made for, that was probably 1984. It's kind of the early days of MTV. If it had been made with better technique at a bigger budget, it would have kind of fit in with the aesthetic of the day. But it wasn't. It's pretty amateurish. But the ideas were fun to play with, and it was a challenge to, like I said, you had to pretty much edit in camera. I could make cuts, but you only have one roll of film. You're not going to make a very long music video if you don't make the most of every frame that you've got.
So let me ask you this, and obviously you won all the awards in high school. You've now essentially said to yourself, yes, I want to be a filmmaker. So was there anyone in your school, whether it be a guidance counselor, a teacher, other students who said to you, no, don't do this, you are crazy?
Yeah. Well, I had other student friends who were very, very much in the same mindset as I am, and I'm still in contact with them. And they all wanted to make films, but I was probably the most gung ho. And then there was a guidance counselor, Mr. Musco, who, when I told him what I wanted to do with my life, in answer to his question, he just said, no, you don't want to do that. Hollywood is all homosexuals and drug abusers, which was an astonishing thing to hear from a school official.
Is that bad?
I didn't know what. Yeah, exactly. That's what I said, and I'm supposed to be upset about that. But I liked how bizarrely quick he was to dismiss my life's ambitions.
Right.
And but it didn't dissuade me at all. Not even for a moment. I remember thinking, well, that's then I guess I'll be, I guess I'll be in Hollywood doing,
making interesting friends and doing lots of drugs.
Being a degenerate making movies.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sometimes that's the kind of thing that you need to kind of double down and be like, you know what, man, I'm going to show you. That this is a good path for me, and that in your heart. You must have gotten other support though. Family must have been supportive. Even though this guidance counselor was kind of a tool, it sounds like you at least had support in other areas.
Yeah. My parents were incredibly supportive, and both of them really impressed upon me the idea that I could do anything I wanted if I put my mind to it and put in the hard work, which was key. And, I think at that age, that's the part you need to be told. Not just you can have anything you want, but that if that you're going to have to put in all the work. And they were good at impressing that upon me. And same with my aunts and uncles were very supportive and always tried to, they'd, buy me art supplies and things like that as gifts. And
it's what every kid needs.
And, and my parents kind of made it clear that if I showed the initiative, they'd help me sort of work that out. And so they, I thought I would go to either NYU or USC, but I think my parents were right in saying they thought I wasn't ready for a big city at that point, coming from Butler, Pennsylvania. It would have been a big culture shock. And so they found Ithaca College in Ithaca, New York. And it's, turns out they were, at that point, I don't know if they still are, but they were a relatively high-rated film school. My sister was going to Cornell, and my mom just asked a tour guide at Cornell, "What's that over on the other hill there?" And they said, "Oh, that's Ithaca College." I wasn't even expecting to have a lot of college options. And my mom asked, "Well, what is Ithaca College for? Why would someone come all the way to Ithaca, New York, and not go to Cornell?" And she said, "Well, they have a good hotel management program and a good sports program, sports medicine, and they also have a really good film program." And of course, I lit up, and we went over there and figured out what to do. And I applied there, and I went there. It turned out they have a unique thing, unlike USC and unlike NYU and a lot of other film schools. Instead of having to sort of fight your way to being one of the students that gets to write or direct, you get a camera put in your hand in the very first semester, and you start making 16 millimeter films.
Wow.
They skip right past 8 millimeter stuff, and they put a Bolex in your hand in the very first weeks of your time there. Start teaching you the basics, start teaching you production. And I was making films in my first semester there. They weren't good, of course, but I made them. And that's, you got to make a whole bunch of terrible films till you
did they have sound?
Eventually get to make good ones.
They had sound.
Yeah.
These ones had sound.
Forward.
Yeah.
As you said, though, you
It
know,
was.
you have to break some eggs to make some omelets, right? I mean, this is at the fundamental level where you're learning filmmaking. How instrumental was the educational part of it and the nuts and bolts of those fundamentals later in your career? Was it instrumental? Was it not what you expected? What was that experience like?
It was absolutely instrumental, and to the point where it was a small school then. It's bigger now, and maybe there were, I'm just guessing, maybe 20 film students in my class, and one of them has been my editor on all of my features I've made so far.
Wow.
I made 2 features, hoping to make more, but and she's worked. Her name's Sarah Corrigan. She was one of my fellow students from the very first semester, and she's edited on 6 Woody
Wow.
Allen films, and edited Daniel Radcliffe film a couple years ago. Just edited the new film Summoning Sylvia. But so even just for connections, it already was sort of magical. I'm still friends with a lot of people from that. One of the people from that class, it was Chris Regan, who is a producer and writer on Family Guy now. Another one was Pat Cady, who shoots the TV show Bosch and shot a whole bunch of other
Wow.
movies, for John Sayles and stuff. So like a bunch of, and a guy 1 year ahead of me, John Buzz Moyer, he does Steadicam for Steven Spielberg now, and for the Avengers film. So I mean, that class, a bunch of us, stuck with it. Let's just say.
He had some real pedigree.
It was,
Absolutely.
and I feel like I'm forgetting somebody that's good too. But,
You've met a lot of people along the way.
Yeah, and I got lucky, and I always say you never know where the weird connection that's going to wind up being important comes from. And my parents' dry cleaner, while I was in my freshman year of college, said, "Oh yeah, I can get you hooked up with a job in film." And I didn't take it seriously, but it turned out he knew someone at a company at the time that was called Hartwick Brzezborski in Pittsburgh, and they were the biggest commercial production company in Pittsburgh, and he got me an interview, and I went down and I got an internship there. And so in all of my breaks starting in freshman year, I was going and getting professional experience on film sets of pretty big budget TV commercials, and then coming back and learning film theory and screenwriting and editing and film production and all that at school. So I was simultaneously having kind of the academic route and the professional route, and I got lucky at somebody else's expense. I got lucky that on that commercial film crew, somebody, I'm trying to think of a nice way to say it, somebody didn't do well in the camera department, and I got to replace them. So I moved up from a PA to a grip into being a camera assistant, pulling focus and loading the camera and changing lenses pretty quickly.
For the TV commercials.
I got to learn, and I got to learn at the feet of several really good commercial directors, like this guy Glenn Prisborski kind of taught me, sort of took me under his wing. He could see that I was a very gung-ho kid as far as filmmaking. And then a lot of the stuff we were shooting was in the same building where George Romero was shooting a movie called Monkey Shines, and I got to watch a lot of that happen and got to meet and work around George Romero and Tom Savini. And I went over, and since I was fascinated with special effects too, and I was a sculptor, my friend Glenn and I took our sculptures and interviewed with Greg Nicotero and Tom Savini, sort of special effects legends, and tried to get ourselves a job in the effects department, but we were a little too late. They said they already had all the sculptors they needed, but they complimented our stuff. But the reason I say that is that it's funny how, like, as a connection as weird as my parents' dry cleaner led to me, if the timing had been a little better, I was all the way in the door with George Romero and Tom Savini and one of the biggest effects houses
gurus in the world. Yeah.
So Harry, as you're walking through all this stuff, you've made movies. You're a film major. You're working on all these different shoots, all these different commercials. You're sculpting. Are you playing music at this point also? Like, where are you finding the time to do all of these different things at such a young age?
Yeah. At what point did you go to sleep? Did you go to sleep?
I didn't sleep a lot at that point. I agree. But Well, I'd gotten, like most of us, I assume I'd gotten fascinated with music in my teens, and uh, you know, like I always say, it's funny. The same year I discovered uh, Star Wars, when I was 9, Kiss also kind of hit really big, and in my small town comic book loving, horror film loving, science fiction film loving world, that was exactly the right band at exactly the right time, but they also led me to, like, I was a voracious reader of stuff about the movies and the bands that I liked. And it's just funny, I still have a little, I think it was Rod Swenson that wrote this little book about Kiss. It was the kind of thing that only a 9-year-old would think was worth buying, but it had all this information about them, talking about their influences. And so it's like, I got to find out what is this thing Led Zeppelin, what is this thing the Beatles, what is this thing the Rolling Stones. And I started exploring and buying records based on what the members of Kiss had talked about, but and it led me to all of that stuff. And I started badgering my parents and my grandmother for a guitar, and I got one for a birthday or Hanukkah or something, and then started to learn to play. And I'm not really that, I think, that particularly musically talented, but I was determined, but it took me a long time to get to even like a passable level. So I didn't really start playing, you know, professionally or out in front of people till after college. But I was just learning and playing all the time, and playing along with friends, and sort of just screwing around with it. And but then sometime after college, I started trying to write songs and sing, and I got started eventually playing with a girl that was a friend of mine that sang, and I would accompany her, and we started playing sort of hippie, like Grateful Dead type festivals, and somewhere much later that led to Jesse Malin asking me if he saw me play guitar in a club in New York, and he asked me if I would be interested in coming out on tour with him as his guitar tech. You notice he didn't invite me to come play guitar.
Well, obviously,
But
you probably weren't. You probably weren't. You weren't a true shredder at that point. But you did know what you did know. You did know what you were talking about in terms of guitars. Harry, let me ask you this. I want to drag you back into the film world for a second. And look, you're a Pennsylvania guy. You had said you had worked in Pittsburgh. You met Tom Savini, Greg Nicotero, and obviously you mentioned a moment ago the idea of having met George Romero. I mean, for God's sakes, he is the godfather of a genre of horror. And you're talking to someone in me who's a comic book nut, who's a sci-fi nut, who's a horror nut as well. And like you, I was, my mind was blown when the first time I saw Star Wars. But as a
sure.
Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh guy, everything kind of comes to a head with Romero and that world. So, while you were there saying to yourself, I'm going to make big movies, I'm going to make, the big type of spectacular big splash movies, how much did that indie influence, that underground influence of Romero work into your filmmaking?
it definitely did. It's I mean, I think
Or did it?
his
Or did it?
influence
I
had
mean,
already.
like, it could have just like been a slight influence at all. I mean, or that notion of I want to say that small, making making the most of things on a small budget.
Yeah, well, absolutely it did. It's funny that I mean, I think his influence had already by that point, because I mean, he'd made Night of the Living Dead 1968, and I was working there probably starting in 1985, 86, and probably meeting him in maybe 87. It was on the set of Monkey Shines, his movie. Nobody seems to remember that one, but that's where I met him. So his influence had already kind of permeated the industry as far as like helping to create, along with people like John Sayles and John Waters and other people that helped to sort of, and John Cassavetes and all these people that had kind of built this world of, no frills independent filmmaking. It had already permeated the industry, but in Pittsburgh, I felt like one of the ways that it helped was a lot of the crew members I was working on had gotten their start working on his films, particularly at that point, Dawn of the Dead, the one that had shot in 1978. He'd assembled a crew in Pittsburgh of Pittsburgh people, and that kind of helped, in a way that Night of the Living Dead didn't really have a chance to, because it was almost too early and the equipment was too expensive, for a industry to sort of start up in a far-flung place like Pittsburgh. I think Dawn of the Dead helped to spawn a lot of other filmmakers like Tony Buba and John Rice that were on his crew. Tony Buba is a award-winning documentarian. He was George Romero's sound man. John Rice was a director of a ton of commercials. He was his camera assistant. A lot of those, Ed Lettieri, all these people who were, his very low budget crew continued on to sort of branch off into their own production companies and their own filmmaking. And those were the people that were teaching me when I was first starting. They had already sort of built their little individual companies, but they were also working on these big budget commercials that I was working on. Those people were kind enough to take me under their wing. And then when I started having ideas for projects of my own, thankfully those people were willing to help me get things off the ground at the time. And I had several abortive projects that I tried to make in Pittsburgh, and even if they didn't get completely off the ground and didn't go anywhere, I still had some of the best people going, trying to help me get them somewhere, designing my sets and helping me through revising scripts and stuff. So it really did do what you're saying. It was, the Romero influence kind of rippled outward from him to so many other people in that town. And
can we talk about the Pittsburgh stuff? I think it's such a critical time in your career, and I really want to talk about how you get from point A to point B. So you mentioned you were working in Pittsburgh. You're doing commercial work. You're making connections like crazy, right? That's such an instrumental part of like how you build yourself in this industry. You talked about being a camera assistant, and I want you to just talk about how that's so critical, because you're literally at the foot of the director. You're learning everything a director knows, how to interact with talent, how to think about the next scene that you're going to do after you're done filming the scene you're doing. So right now you're a camera assistant. You're cutting your teeth literally at the feet of somebody who later on you aspire to be, I'm sure. So how does that happen, and what does that lead to in terms of your career arc?
Well, the crucial next step is that having learned a lot about sort of the mechanics of directing at the feet of some commercial directors, I reached the point where I was a good enough camera assistant that a lot of major features started coming into Pittsburgh, because it was a non-union town and they could save money shooting in Pittsburgh by hiring non-union crew. And I was non-union, and so I got to then be a camera assistant at the foot of directors like John Landis, Bill Duke, who's an action actor, but he directed a film I was working on there. Tim Robbins.
So how does that happen?
Bob Roberts.
How do you Bob Roberts? What a great film! I mean, you're throwing around these names like they're nothing. I mean, these are major films. Is it a connection? Is it a relationship? Does someone call you? Do you know someone who knows someone? How does that work?
Mostly the latter. Mostly what happens is people from one shoot that you're on, even if it's a commercial, start to get the call from another shoot that's crewing up. And like it could be anyone. It could be just either a director of photography, or if I was on a shoot as a second assistant camera, the first assistant camera might be getting the call to go work on, say, Innocent Blood, and that's the John Landis film I worked on. He would they often like to bring people in that they know that they can trust to not embarrass them, or do or at least hopefully to do a proficient enough job that the job will get done. And so I started to get a little bit of a reputation as a reliable camera assistant, and very often then successfully making it through one entire feature without getting fired will get you.
You proved you weren't a moron.
Exactly, yeah. And it's surprising how many people don't prove that they're not a moron. And it's easy to wash out and very quickly on features, because there's so much money at stake that they're kind of ruthless, mostly about just cutting people loose if they're not up to the task. And it's definitely a young man's game, and I was young at the time. And being a crew member on features is, minimum of 12 hours a day, usually 6 days a week, and very often as the week wears on, it turns into 14 hours, 15 hours, 16 hours a day. And it's whatever the weather conditions are, hot or cold, you're often subject to that. And so I was pretty hardy at that point
Well, you
as
were
far as being
young,
able to, yeah,
less
exactly.
grown
And
up.
I was extremely, yeah, well, yeah, we'll go with that. Yeah. I was extremely gung ho to do whatever it took at the time. Um, and I think it was probably an asset that I was also, friendly and had a good attitude. Like I was, John Landis was kind of known as a screamer and angry on set, but he took a liking to me, and he liked, he had fun talking to me. And I feel like, even if I had been not the most technically proficient AC, he liked having me around. So I got to stay on that movie.
That's
And
amazing.
I think people, it's the kind of thing, it's like summer camp where it's like, well, you want to be around the people you enjoy being around. You're kind of stuck with them for under, constrained conditions for a long time. And you want to be with the people you can handle, that you can stand for that length of time. And so that was sort of the leg up into it, was just, kind of getting along with people, and getting through brutal days, and being willing to then show up again the next morning for the next 12 to 16-hour day.
So, with that, how long were you, in the Pittsburgh scene? And when did you decide that you wanted to move on to something else? What was that transition like?
Yeah, I, if I remember, I think I did about 13 years in Pittsburgh. I'm 55 now. I think I did 13 years in Pittsburgh, working on commercials, feature films, music videos, and industrial, like corporate video. And that was kind of what made me leave. Was it turns out there's kind of like a little devil's bargain that happens. If you get to be known for being proficient, features are hard work. Corporate and industrial work is easier, the hours are better, and the pay is way better, because they know it. They have to pay you more to get you to do this incredibly less glamorous work. And I started, and I started doing. I got hired a lot by this company, and it was kind of, it was lucrative, but I started realizing that, like, I'd made the devil's bargain, and I was spending, spending years of my life at that point, making stuff that you have to order people to watch, in a conference room. And we're filming in a conference room stuff that somebody else will be ordered to watch in a conference room, or forced to watch, as part of their job. And I always thought, like, well, films you go pay to watch, commercials they kind of have to trick you into watching, and corporate video you have to be ordered or paid to watch. And and I found myself thinking, like, I want to get back to what I love, which is the art side of filmmaking. And I felt like I wasn't going to be doing that in Pittsburgh. And so I just started thinking about how, where's the home of sort of independent labor of love filmmaking. And I decided to move to New York City, partly for that and partly for music too. I was playing music a lot with the woman that I was playing music with. Her name is Michelle Vargo, and she, we were playing a lot, and I thought it was the perfect kind of way to come to New York. I could make some money doing music. I could make some money doing film, and moved here in 1999.
What was that first labor of love film that you worked on?
Uh, the it's funny, the I don't know if it ever came out, but I came here. I came here with the promise from a guy that was doing videos for Saturday Night Live. I met him when I was here visiting, trying to figure out where to live, and he told me, "I will hire you immediately upon arrival. You've got so much experience." And so I came here overconfident, thinking I've already got a job. And I got here, and I never heard
Oh,
from that guy
geez.
again. So I started really having to kind of desperately figure out, like, oh wow, I was used to being sort of the young gung ho kid in Pittsburgh, and I got here and I thought, I'm a little older now, and a lot of the New York film industry is people fresh out of NYU, and oftentimes, they have parents who are kind of willing to foot the bill for the first few years of that by making it so they can work either cheap or free. And so I'm competing with people that don't, a lot of the time, didn't need to pay the rent, and they're younger, they're more gung-ho, they're hardier than I am at that point. And so I started going to the mayor's office of film and television, and just, at the time they kept a physical list of all the productions that were crewing up, and I just started, doing the phone legwork, calling production offices, going in with resumes, going in, and then I got hired on a film called Moment in Time. I don't know. I don't think it ever came out. Um, the director was a guy named Robert Orlando, and the director of photography was a guy named Jan Visenberg, who I worked with many times after that. And he hired me, and then 2 days later, he called to tell me he had to cut me loose because they had hired a kid fresh out of NYU who owned his own 16 millimeter
Oh,
camera
boy.
system. And so they were going to save
Wow.
money by hiring an AC who was going to rent them the camera. And I was like, wow, I don't know how to compete with that. And
Right.
he said, unless you want, you could stay on as the second assistant camera. And I needed the work. So I said, yes. And it's funny that kid who took my job, William Miller, became one of my lifelong friends since then, and he moved up and became a DP, and I started working with him, and I worked on probably a dozen movies with him. Turned out that the guy who at first I was maybe frustrated at is an amazing filmmaker himself. He was younger than me and he was fresh out of NYU, but I wound up pulling focus for him for a bunch of movies, and then hired him to, when I started moving to directing, I hired him to be my DP on.
Did you
some
fire him
music
2 days
videos
later?
that I
Deserved
did.
it.
I should have. That would have been gold. No, it was,
I want you to be my DP, Will. You're fired.
yeah. But it's like there's the scene in Charlie Wilson's War where Philip Seymour Hoffman tells the story of the Zen master who, like, it's where whenever something bad happens, he says, we'll see. And then when something good happens, he says, we'll see. Because, you just don't know. And so what I thought was a terribly unfortunate thing of losing the first assistant job, actually, several of the people on that very first feature I worked on are people I've worked with, many dozens of times since, and wound up being the connections that led to Carmine Famigletti, who wrote and starred in the movie Pounds, which is one of the greatest things I've ever worked on in my life. It was at Sundance, and that guy who wrote and starred in that wound up producing both of my features and is one of my best friends in the world to this day. And I wouldn't have met him if not for Bill Miller, the guy who had stolen my job on that first. Yeah, so it wound up being an opportunity, that came out of that, what seemed like a crisis at the time. And again, it really is kind of like a who you know, but also how well you interact with the people that you know. And the fact that I didn't come into that feature with a bad attitude because of the situation. I worked just as hard as Bill Miller's second AC, even though I graduated from being a second AC years before that. It was the last time I ever worked as a second AC, but it was the right thing to do, and I, made amazing connections from that, and still am working with those people to this day.
A very quick question before I hand it to Tushar. How long was it in between, coming in from Pittsburgh and establishing that network? How long did that take?
At the time, it seemed like it took forever because it was terrifying, but because I had rent to pay. But I believe I was already working on my second feature with that group of people by just before 9/11. So that means it would have only been like a year and a half from when I
So
moved.
It took about a year and a half to set up that network.
Yeah, and then I've met a lot of made a lot more connections since then, and met a lot of people since then. But it took that long just to feel like I got my sort of foot in the door and had a sort of a safe group of people that started hiring me on a bunch of other things dependably. did commercials with those same people, did, maybe, a couple dozen features just from the connections from that initial group.
All right, so first of all, I want to go back to you talking about Charlie Wilson's War. If you guys haven't seen that, you got to see this movie. It's one of my favorites. It's in my collection. It's one of my absolute favorite movies, and it's one of those roles that Tom Hanks like never gets any real credit for. He's really good in that movie.
And same with Philip Seymour Hoffman's role.
They're all. I mean, and Julia Roberts is great in that movie too. My God, I love that movie.
But then the speech I'm talking about, right?
I know exactly the speech you're talking about because I love that film. I'm telling you, I love that film.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
so
didn't do justice to the speech.
he didn't do justice to the speech, and that movie is unfairly underrated. That is grossly underrated. It's a really good film.
Absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely.
So obviously you've had this opportunity now to build out this network. I kind of wanted to talk a moment ago about this notion of like in Pittsburgh, you turned yourself into a big fish in a little pond, and then coming into New York, I would have thought that, that feeling would have kind of ebbed a bit, but I was surprised for you to say that, when you came here, you kind of became the little fish in the big pond, even though you had all this experience, but still were able to break through. I mean, that's just so surprising to me.
Yeah, I'm skipping a lot of like hilarious, almost slapstick level failures in that first year and a half of trying to, I would get a job and in film and find out, like the terrible reason why why that job fell apart, that kind of stuff. But I was just very determined, and it was, I guess the same way that when I got to Ithaca College, I thought I knew enough to be. I'm not a star film student, but I thought I would be. I thought I was coming into college with
cred.
I think I thought I knew everything, and I found out everyone else there knew as much or more, and I felt like maybe a little bit of misplaced confidence helps, but maybe mixed with a little bit of humility, so you're at least ready to have your ass handed to you when you find out that you're not the king of the world. But I just, when I got to New York and I had figured out that it wasn't going to be as easy as I'd hoped, I just sort of I had no choice but to sort of buckle down and take whatever was offered, and I just was determined not to like take anything that would take my eye off the goal of being involved with low budget labors of love. I was not going to take any corporate film work. I was not going to take any, like shooting depositions for court or anything that was going to sort of force me to maintain a job that I wasn't looking for. It's very easy to find a gilded cage that it pays well and you just stay in that spot because you can't afford to lose that paycheck. I was determined, and I think it was the right move to get involved with people that were making movies that were full of their own heart and soul. And the movie Pounds was really where I knew, like I said, that first movie, Moment in Time, the guy meant well, and it was a labor of love, but it wasn't a good film. And then I got involved with several other films always with great people. But then that movie Pounds is a beautiful, beautiful film that you should check out if you could find a way to see it. It's about my friend wrote himself a part where he was around 400 pounds, and he wrote himself a movie about a guy that loses 200 pounds and changes his life. And we shot it over 2 years, and he lost the most weight that any actor's ever lost on screen. And,
wow.
And it's a narrative. It's not a documentary. It's he got himself, not to be a spoiler, but he got himself down over 200 pounds from his original weight, and it's a powerful movie with an incredible cast. And like I said, it made it to Sundance, and it won the New York Avignon Film Festival and all this stuff. And then they made another film together called A Mexicano, which also was great, played at Tribeca. And I started having the nerve to show these people my scripts. And a lot of the time, people that are making their own films aren't interested in anyone else's ideas but their own. But these were very kind people who took me seriously enough to read what I was bringing to the table. And then now I'm lucky enough that all these years later, like I said, I've helped them on their projects, and they help and produce, on my projects. And from good advice from my dad when I was young, that find a like-minded group of people who all have the same thing, the same sort of goals, and work on each other's projects and support each other's dreams. And I got lucky and got involved with that. And so that's the short version of how it all comes together.
All right, so let me ask you this. Now, I actually was gonna say, like, obviously when you first started out, you had your thoughts of going to NYU or USC Film School, and then when you got to New York and you began losing gigs to NYU kids, I'm surprised you didn't go to NYU and burn it down, to be honest with you. but seriously though, as your career progressed, as your career has progressed, have you found, and you're obviously a director, you obviously have a great eye behind the camera. Have you found that you prefer being behind the camera or as a writer, as a script writer?
I really like both. I always wanted to write and direct. I always felt like there's a way in which that, to me, that was always the dream. And I think it's funny, I misunderstood. I thought, I think when I was young, I was such a huge Kubrick fanatic, and I didn't realize till later, he actually wrote very few of his own stories, and
yes,
very rarely was the screenwriter on his own films. He would hire good writers and pick a novel or a short story that he liked and have someone flesh that out into a script for him. He definitely oversaw all of that, of course, but I think I was into this sort of auteur theory idea, and so for me, it was always about trying to figure out a way to write my own scripts and direct them myself, because I feel like then that the director really gets the script, and if you're sitting there directing actors and they ask, why does the character say this, and you have to go, I'm not sure. Like that's a bad look, I think, on set. So I always felt like at least I knew that if I told an actor what a moment meant in a script, or what their character would be thinking, at least knowing that I wrote it, they would believe me, even if I was bullshitting, which I really am not. But so it was always about being able to do both. I almost see the two as inextricably linked, even though most people don't do both.
And I know your music is a big part of your life too. I want to talk about the balance though, because you're talking about your writing, you're talking about filmmaking. I mean, those are huge endeavors. The music stuff, I know we're going to talk about in a moment, it's huge endeavors. Do you have time that you set aside when you're trying to balance your creative outlet with, I'm going to write from such and such to such and such, or from Monday through Wednesday, right? Or from 9 to 2. And then I'm going to work on putting together my crew for my next film. And then I'm going to go play that gig tonight. Like, do you have time that you set aside for balancing all of your creative outlets? Because we're talking about so many things here, and most people have one of these, if that, right? And you're balancing all of them. We joked about you don't have time to sleep, but how do you find the balance?
I hate to admit, but I think it's much more chaotic. I think it's it might sound pretentious, but Roger Waters referred to the feeling of being pregnant with an idea, where it's like you've got the thing that you've got to get out. And I think that just, I'm not comparing myself to him, of course, but I'm saying I think that his phrasing of that is sort of how I organize my approach to it. Just like I have to see through the idea that's kind of burning and churning to get out, And so if I have an idea for a script, or for a song, or for anything like that, I think I just kind of follow I hesitate to say muse, but I follow whatever the inclination is. And and then sort of the schedule sets itself. It's like if I'm working on a script, I wind up, my tendency was to just stay up all night, and I feel like the world shuts down and you stop getting phone calls and texts, and there's nothing particularly pressing from anywhere else between about 1 a.m. and 7 or 8 a.m. And so almost everything I've ever written, I write in those hours. And
love it.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I'm out cold.
Well, I
It's
also
nice
think,
right
you know,
then, right? That's a good sweet
when
spot.
you get tired, I think you get a little. It's almost like a drug in your brain chemistry. That when you reach that point, there's a little bit of madness at, like, 6 or 7 in the morning when you go
No,
to
I'm
bed.
with
So
you.
I think
I get that loopy feel too. No, I get you.
yeah, and sometimes that's a good time to kind of tie ideas together. That's sometimes where,
That's
like,
great.
where the connections get drawn suddenly. So I always felt like those are the hours. Then do the rest of the things you need. The errands and things like that, and the rest of the day. And to me, those are prime hours for that. And then the during the day hours are when you can do things like the production paperwork, or the guitar teching or whatever. And it helped that even working as a guitar tech for any of the people that I've worked with, those unless you're on tour, you're going to be home maybe around 1 or 2, and then you can
Sleep
start
all day Sunday.
just sit down and start writing then. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard this whole story.
I've
There's
yet
no
to
sleep.
hear
You haven't
it.
eaten
No,
yet either.
there's no sleep. There was no sleep in any of the schedule, by the way.
Now I'm older, and I need more sleep now. I've had some health issues. I need more sleep just to heal. But maybe that's because of all the lack of sleep for the years before that.
So
But
Harry, I'm trying to figure out how to ask this next question. So you have so many different interests, as we've been talking about. You've been pursuing your film career. You have dabbled in music when you were younger. And, part of your story and part of your journey is the fact that you have worked with, guitar tech for, supported some really famous and really well-known and highly respected musicians. How did you establish that network? Like where did that path come from? And can you kind of take us through what that journey has been for you?
I guess the easy way to answer that question is: are you the modern day Forrest Gump?
I've said that about myself too. I really have. I that or Zelen. If you saw that film, yeah, definitely. There's a bit of that. I feel like I've had a funny way of sort of winding up connected with the people that I used to dream about working with, and I've done so usually without seeking it out. Like the way I wound up connected to the musicians that you're asking about all starts with a friend of mine from college, who they call Brother Mike Cohen,
Who I know.
was DJing in a
Great guy.
bar.
Yep.
Yeah, I know you know him. Yeah, he's a hilarious and very talented guy himself. Has some short films animated of recordings he made of his parents surreptitiously when he was a kid. It's really brilliant stuff that he made with a cartoonist, an animator who also went to Ithaca College. So again, the connections have stayed. But he was DJing at a bar owned by a musician named Jesse Malin, and Jesse Malin was the musician who saw me playing guitar in a bar and asked if I would tech for him on a gig. That turned into, shortly after that, by coincidence, very shortly after I started working as his guitar tech because there was a gap in film work. I was like, yeah, I guess I'll do that. That's something I could do. And there was like it looked like there was going to be a month or so before there was going to be another feature to work on. And I thought, well, that would be interesting. It's something I've never done. Then right after that, Jesse Malin got a call from Bruce Springsteen asking him to do a show with him. That led to meeting Bruce and meeting Bruce's crew. And
My God,
And you've
come
guitar
on.
tech for Bruce, right?
Yeah,
Multiple
yeah.
times.
Yeah, I have, yeah, and even filmed a behind the scenes documentary of Jesse doing doing a duet with Bruce called Broken Radio that was on Jesse's album. I got to film behind the scenes of them recording the song in the first place at Bruce's house, and then go back while Danny Clinch was directing the music video for that song. I got to direct the behind the scenes footage for a documentary on that. And that day, Bruce's guitar tech had a family thing he had to do at the last minute, and he asked me if I would take over as Bruce's guitar tech alongside shooting the video. I had to get Bruce's guitars ready. Bruce's regular guitar tech knew he'd seen me tech for Jesse before, so he asked me if I would step in and do that, and that gave him confidence that in the very rare instances where he needed to replace himself for recording sessions, or for even one weird night where the Bruce on Broadway show nearly got snowed out by that massive ice storm a few years ago that shut down the city of New York. Bruce's guitar tech was stuck in the tunnel, and I got the call at the last second to run down to Bruce on Broadway and set up and get ready to tech for Bruce on Broadway.
That's just not right. It's just not right.
Yeah.
What a network you have.
Yeah. And then Jesse, works with a lot of great people. So I've got to tech for Ian Hunter, Lucinda Williams, Jacob Dylan.
Come on.
Who else? Willie Nile, The Strokes. Who else? It's tough.
I think you mentioned Ryan Adams to me once.
I teched. Yeah. I teched for Ryan Adams, and then that led to getting to tech for Bob Weir's group Rat Dog, and with Phil Lesh and recording studio stuff, and then that led to, this is how bizarre and Forrest Gump like it's all been, where I was on a tour with Jesse opening for Ryan Adams, and he would have Phil Lesh come out for a little mini set with Ryan Adams at the end of each night. And then on the last night, Phil was unable to be there for the encore of the Ryan Adams show. So they just crazily decided, well, let's just book a late night after hours gig. And Ryan tried to get Jesse and Jacob Dylan, who were there that night, to join him for a big super group that night with Phil Lesh at a place called 12 Galaxies in San Francisco. It started at like 2 a.m, and I got there thinking I was teching the gig. And when I got there, Jesse and Jacob both bowed out and didn't want to play. So I got there and Ryan Adams said, "You're playing the gig tonight." And he handed me a guitar. And he just said, just follow me, get on stage and follow me. You can watch it on YouTube. And I was terrible.
You, Ryan Adams, and Phil Lesh.
Terrible, but me, Ryan Adams, Phil Lesh, and Chad Tasky, who
was Obama in the audience? Because it would make sense. You've met Obama would be the next person. Was Obama in the audience?
No, but it was. I always joke, it's like that dream you have where you're like, I was there, and then my second grade teacher and Mikhail Gorbachev were watching. But no, I was there, and my at the time ex-girlfriend was there, which was funny. And Jacob Dylan and Jesse Malin were watching from the balcony above the stage while I'm standing on stage with Phil Lesh, turning to me every so often and going, E minor.
Oh, that's great.
Because I didn't know how to play those songs, I didn't know how to play those songs at all. And Ryan had just all he said was before he went out there on stage. I said they showed me a set list, and I said I don't know how to play any of those songs. And in unison, Phil Lesh and Ryan Adams said, "Perfect." and then right before going out on stage, Ryan just took me aside and looked me straight in the eye with great seriousness and said, "Just play your heart out, play what you feel, and tuck in your shirt."
Oh, that's great.
And when you look at the still pictures of it, you see that or if you look at the video, you see that I'm playing the best I can, which was not amazing. I'm easily the worst guy that's probably shared the stage with either of those two, Hall of Fame level players. But my shirt is properly.
Well, that's nice.
Well, there you go. At least you look nice. At least you look nice.
Yeah, I was able to do that. So I've gotten to work with, Bob Weir and, Nora Jones and James Eha and trying to think who, Mike Campbell and Perry Farrell and,
and beyond guitar teching, right? You've been like a stage manager too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was stage manager for all the they started this thing called the Best Fests, which is the Dylan Fest, the Petty Fest, the Stones Fest, where they would have just an all-star cast of musicians get up and do a couple of songs by those artists. So I was stage manager, but also sometimes doubling as stage manager and guitar tech. So I was tuning guitars for people as strange as Boz Scaggs and John McEnroe.
Oh, geez.
And
Come
then
on.
stage managing for like Jason Sudeikis and Will Forte and Kristen Wiig and all those, Regina Spektor, and it became like a Donald Fagen. I mean, he's a keyboard player, so he didn't really need much besides telling him when to go on and stuff. But so I got to work with a pretty crazy cast of characters, and that's all in a way. It comes back to the sort of networking thing of that. All of that starts with the connections through Jesse Malin, who's one of my best friends in the world and one of the kindest people, most kind-hearted people you'll ever know. And he just opened for Lucinda Williams at the City Winery last night. I've got to work with her a bunch of times through him.
When was the last time you spoke to anybody over at Ithaca? I mean, like in the administration, because you are by far and away the single greatest piece of advertising for that school. I have never been more jazzed up to hear about Ithaca in my life than I am right now.
Yeah. No, well, they were kind enough to bring me and my editor, who also Ithaca college graduate, Sarah Corrigan, up there. I think it was 2019, if I'm not mistaken, to talk to the film students and screen Staring at the Sun, which was my first feature, and tell them about and show some sort of half-finished scenes from Hereafter, which I was still in the process of editing at that point. And Patty Zimmerman, who's a great professor there, still was teaching there, and so she saw to it. She brought me there. We gave talks to students. We did roundtable with students trying to give career advice. And again, my story is such a ludicrously circuitous route to doing what I'm doing that all I could say was, well, I don't suggest anyone attempt to learn from the path of what got me to directing. But what I would say is,
at least not without a net, for God's sakes.
well, but I'm a good lesson in don't discount any possibilities, and just don't overlook any opportunities, and certainly don't think that something as crazy as your parents' dry cleaner couldn't be the opportunity you're looking for. So at least in that way, I was a good example. I definitely always came at everything as at least with the hope that it was potentially a route somewhere. And I think it's that thing of having an indomitable spirit where you always believe that you could do the thing that you want to do. And like I always say, there's never a shortage of people to tell you that your dream is impossible, and your job is to not listen to them if you really want to do it, and just keep plugging away at it. And if you could do anything else, you probably should, in a way. But like if you've got that feeling of like, no, this is the only thing I want to do with my life, then that feeling will probably help get you there. And I feel like it's been true for a lot of my friends. A lot of my friends that are making films did not go to school for it. I have friends that are directing films or writing films that didn't go to college at all. There is no one way there. All there is just keeping your eye on the ball and keeping working towards it, and knowing that you're going to have to write a bunch of terrible scripts before you write even a halfway good one, knowing that you're going to have to maybe make some terrible films or videos or something, that very few people start out making Citizen Kane.
Under no condition are you to take a nap,
and barely eat, apparently,
and no sleep.
So Harry, I know what your job title is. I figured it out. I know what your job title is. Your job title is simply creative. That's it. You are a creative. No, it's not even being funny in this case. Like, this is your job. Your job is to be as creative as possible, and you've done it. You've really done that. You've achieved that.
Well, I think this, like the thing where Ryan Adams said, "Do you want to get on stage?" I could have said no, but I always feel like I would have regretted for the rest of my life that I said no and didn't have the nerve to get out there and do it. And the same with, I got lucky, and I wanted to have Angelo Badalamenti, something like Angelo Badalamenti, the guy that wrote all the music for all of the Twin Peaks and David Lynch stuff. I wanted to have something like that for the music for my film, and I thought, why don't I just reach out and ask him? And I asked him, and he said yes. And so I went over and I got him to do music for my film. And then he said, "Do you write lyrics?" And I said, "Yeah." And I could have, said, "No, no, no, I'm not. You want to get a better lyricist." But then I had the nerve and the gall and the misguided self-belief maybe to say yes. And I wrote the lyrics. And then I asked Debbie Harry if she would sing it, and because I had worked with her through Jesse Malin as well, and
His network keeps getting bigger.
it's but I'm saying that it's the nerve to kind of ask for things and reach out to people and dare to say yes when they ask you to do stuff. And like a crew member that I worked with a long time ago said, and I thought this was a great thing. He just said, "Well, I didn't say I was good. I just said I was available." And, and so when you say like that, I would call that my job title is available.
I love the life lessons, professional lessons. I mean, the nuggets that you're dropping honestly could be used for any profession. And just, I don't know if anyone's keeping track at home, but the dream jobs he's already had, gentlemen, right? Where director, filmmaker, writer, stage manager, guitar tech, they just keep guitarists. They keep falling out of you. I want to bring it back to your movies because I watched both of your features. They're amazing. And what I find fascinating about them in their totality is how different they are from each other. And I wonder if you can talk about how you feel about each of them. I know your films are your babies, so you have two babies there, and I'm sure you have many more on the way. So what is your writing process, and what was your thought process when you were putting these together?
I feel bad that it almost always would start with the words, "It's a long story." But I try not to do that to you.
Hereafter and Staring at the Sun, for those of you at home, by the way, I'd be remiss to not mention.
Thank you. Yeah, well, those came together in a very funny way. I was planning to make Hereafter first, and we had it all set up. We were ready to shoot it with a completely different cast, and in 2012, and our lead actress had a scheduling difficulty, and that shut the whole thing down. And I was going to wait a year. And while waiting a year, I couldn't work on the script that everybody had already approved, and so I wrote Staring at the Sun during that year. And then other problems came up, and we couldn't make Hereafter that 1 year later. And so my thought was, well, Staring at the Sun's a more simple film, more straightforward, no special effects. Let's just, I don't want to wait another year for Hereafter. So we went ahead and what was meant to be my second film wound up becoming my first film. And that took longer and was more expensive and much more complicated than I thought. And so like all of my attention got turned over to Staring at the Sun for a number of years. It took a long time in the editing. It took a long time. It's shot in all over the 5 boroughs of New York and in Phoenix and Tucson, Arizona. And it was just a very complicated thing. And it made me realize I'd probably bitten off more than I could have chewed if I had gone ahead and made the sort of effects heavy Hereafter first. And then everything I learned from that, I had written in the while waiting for the time to be right to finally shoot Hereafter. I wrote several more scripts, but then I kept coming around to I really liked the idea of Hereafter. I thought it was unique, and I thought it was so different from what I had just done with Staring at the Sun. Staring at the Sun had played in I think it won 41 awards in 25 festivals, and I don't say that to brag, although I guess by definition I am. But
it's all right.
But what I'm saying is, I felt like I had made it's sort of a coming of age drama with some pretty specific elements. It's about 2 Hasidic teenage girls who run away and try to find a life of freedom somewhere in America that they just imagine must be out there. And so then, Hereafter is so different in that it's a film about love in the afterlife. It's about, a guy dies and finds out that in order to cross over to the other side, you have to have you have to have a soul that you're paired with. You have to have real love, and he's just been dumped, so he's the furthest from that he's ever been. And so it was meant to be a satire on how shitty the world makes you feel when you're single and lonely sometimes. And but it kind of turned into a film about what would real love be like if you had to actually find meaningful love. Like, how would you even know what you were looking for, and how would you find a way to make yourself worthy of that? I was trying to wrestle with big questions, but again, like you said, very, very different from Staring at the Sun.
And great movies, award-winning. Christina Ricci starred in Hereafter. I mean, really, really great big projects. Now, Harry, as you look forward, what's next? What do you have on the burner?
Well, it's funny. Life has a funny way of getting in the way of your plans, but I've been trying to get a third film off the ground. I've had some health issues that have slowed me down on that, and then there was this whole pandemic thing, of course, too. But the film that I'm trying to get off the ground is a horror film, and I wrote it a while back, and been revising it periodically, and it's again extremely different from the other two films. I kind of always admired filmmakers like Kubrick, again, who made films in vastly different genres from each other, and I kind of like the idea of doing that and keeping that kind of a path where you wouldn't necessarily think it was even the same filmmaker. And even though, like me, my films are talky and they're dialogue heavy, like I am.
But unique. And, you certainly pulled that off with your first two.
Well, thank you. And but so the most likely the horror film would be next. We're working on trying to get that off the ground now. And I tend to be relatively secretive.
Okay,
so
I'll ask nothing else.
To wrestle with whether to say
no more digging. Harry, this has been an incredible conversation, an incredible journey. I'm sure we missed about 9,000 things along the way, but this would have been a 7-hour interview.
I never got to talk comic books with you. I never got to talk comic books with you.
That's on the next podcast, right?
But yes. Harry, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very, very much, very sincerely from the bottom of my heart for asking me to do this, because I'm honored to do this. You guys are great, and it's a great conversation. I love the idea of your podcast of trying to, trace the journey of how people got to where they wanted to get to. And it's a beautiful idea.
So that was the self-described creative and, as we put it, world's most interesting man, Harry Greenberger. Tushar, what a fascinating guy.
The one thing he proved, that as long as you go out of your way to prove you are not a moron, you will be successful in life. That is it. Just make sure that you come off as not being a dummy, and make sure that, look, I guess really it's make sure that you come off as likable. People enjoy being around you, and good things will happen. And really, that's really been the case, right? Every step along the way, he proved himself. A, he was a voracious learner. B, the people who were around him not only took a liking to him, but wanted to go out of their way to help him. That's such a great story right there. Something that you can't teach that, but it's something we all need to learn and understand.
Yeah, I love his, be someone people want to work with. You know what I mean? Like, people want to be with you while you're working because you're a good person. So many lessons. I mean, God, there's so much to take out of this. But I think early on when he's in Pittsburgh doing commercials, he talked a lot about being at the right hand of the director and kind of seeing what the director did moment to moment, the big stuff, the little stuff, the decisions that are made, interacting with actors and things of that nature, and the bigger picture project stuff that he had to really have a handle on. So there's so much to take away. I mean, be available. No sleep. Don't worry about not getting any sleep because you're not getting any, right? I love that. Say yes to everything. I mean, there's just so much to take away, and don't laugh off any opportunity because it might be the important one. I mean, that just sticks with me, right? Learn so much.
It reminds me a lot of a book by Pat Riley, The Winter Within, where he says in the book, don't demean your time in the trenches. And that's really like the story of Harry Greenberger, who never demeaned his time in the trenches, and maybe in some ways still believes he kind of is still in the trenches, doing the hard work. And you can see it, right? This man has done everything and then some. Look, our intro could have been a half an hour longer with the amount of stuff this guy has done. It's kind of amazing. But still, he's so humble. He's such a great guy to talk to. Honestly, I kind of wish this conversation didn't end. And I'm really, really happy that we had a chance to speak to Harry Greenberger.
Yeah, and you brought up a really interesting point there, which is about sticking true to who you are and knowing what your mission is and kind of what your objective is, at least having that as a North Star. There are all kinds of other things that can happen as you're pursuing your North Star, which is all about being available and taking different opportunities that come along the way. But ultimately, Harry wasn't willing to compromise in terms of his creative vision when it came to his movies and the things that he was putting together. Which means a lot. I mean, that was a huge takeaway for me. And beyond that, there's a characteristic that a lot of the people we've spoken to have, and that's authenticity. When you're walking into a bar, you're sitting down and you're having a conversation with somebody, which is a lot of what this show is about. People can tell if you're real or not, or you're blowing smoke, whatever it may be. And I don't recall the exact connection of Harry to Jesse Malin, but I do believe that part of that history and part of that dynamic was getting to know each other in real life in a bar and really making a genuine or building a genuine relationship which opened so many doors on the other side of that. So authenticity is just so critically important.
I love that you touched on authenticity because it's what you think about when you think about Harry Greenberger and talk to him and have this conversation, right? Is how authentic he is, what a genuine artist he is. He said it with his films. You're the only one that knows the film that you want to make. I mean, how authentic is that? And some humbleness too, right? 20-year-olds need to give him advice, right? Like you're asking a mentor for advice. He's like, I need to learn from 20-year-olds. Learn from everybody. Be somebody that people want to work with. And man, it's amazing what you can accomplish when you have your heart set out to it and you're a good person.
I can't wait till we get a chance to speak to him again, and I can talk comic books with him.
Yeah, we're not done. Harry, we may be reaching back out sometime soon. So with that, Harry, thank you so much for joining this episode of No Wrong Choices. We also thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed the show, please tell your friends, click follow on your podcasting platform, and give us a 5-star rating. Also, if this episode or others inspired you to think of someone interesting in your life who could be a great guest on the show, please send us a note via the contact form on NoWrongChoices.com. On behalf of Tushar Saxena and Larry Shea, I'm Larry Samuels. Thank you again for joining us, and remember, there are no wrong choices on the road to success. We learn from every experience.